I didn't really think that I would have any more to share after last time. David was gone, and the police were on his case. I had recovered almost fully, shared my story, and was about to go finally put this thing to rest. Every night, I was learning more and more about a universe from the stars, and was being brought deeper into their love. Then, yesterday, I had a truly horrifying conversation with my roommate that I think I need your guys' help with understanding. I think it might be best if I start at the beginning when I made my report at the police station. When I last wrote, I was on my way there for the first time. I don't know what I was expecting from my first time in a police station, but that certainly wasn't it. It was brighter and cleaner than Hollywood had led me to expect. I had visualized a sleek modern interior with cluttered steel desks under fluorescent lighting. Instead, what I got was just another building for public service, as shoddy and nondescript as any post office or DMV. They sat me down in a cheap plastic chair and told me the detective would be with me in a moment. That was the second thing I hadn't prepared for: the wait. I would have thought that being attacked by my psychotic former research partner would have given me a higher priority in the bureaucratic system, especially since that psycho was still at large and had made it very clear he intended to take my life. I waited in that chair for over 45 minutes before the beleaguered Detective Johnston approached me. He was one of those people that hover on the outskirts of attractive. He was like someone had draped the skin of a supermodel over the body of a librarian. He had golden hair, cornflower blue eyes, flawless skin, and straight, square white teeth. He was also short and oddly droopy, for lack of a better word. His skin seemed to be too loose, hanging off of his chin and arms. He slumped down into his chair and riffled through several files without saying a word. "Hello?" I asked, after growing too uncomfortable with the silence. "I'm not here to be your friend," he said in response, still not looking at me. "Just give me your statement, and we can get you out of here in 2 shakes." I told him much of the story that I told to all of you, leaving out the difficult-to-believe aspects involving the stars. He jotted it down, only asking a few clarifying questions here and there. "Alright, so I just have one thing I want to know." He looked at me for the first time, his eyes glinting with a calculating intelligence that had been completely absent before. I felt like I was being dissected, and a chill ran down my spine. "Can you please tell me," he began, his voice dangerous and low, "about your disappearance on Monday before the incident?" "I'm sorry? I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't? That's odd. You see, because I have a Mr. and Mrs. Torres about 60 miles out of town who say he just showed up in their field in pajamas. They have you calling your roommate to pick you up at around 06:30. They also say that you were assaulted before you showed up that day. They were worried about you and called in to their local sheriff's department. So I'm just wondering why you never made any report of this. Does this have anything to do with the incident last week?" "Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. No, I don't think David had anything to do with it." "What makes you so sure? Can you give me a description of your attacker?" "Oh, I didn't see them. It was dark, and they came at me from behind. That's actually the whole reason I didn't call it in. I didn't have any details for it, and didn't want to waste anyone's time." "Investigating assault isn't a waste of police time. That's kind of what we're here for. Why don't you tell me where you were attacked?" "Oh, right here, in the back of the head," I said, pointing at the supposed wound. "What? No, not." He closed his eyes and let out a frustrated breath through his nose, as if trying to rein in his own anger. "Where were you when you were attacked?" "I was just out on an evening walk," I fibbed, trying to think of some alibi he wouldn't be able to verify. "Do you often take walks late at night, in your pajamas, without shoes? Do you often interrogate the victim of a crime without your lawyer present?" I asked, deciding I'd had quite enough of this line of inquiry. Not usually. But you see, Mr. Torres mentioned that someone burned a perfect circle into one of his fields near where he picked you up. I'm just trying to find out whether that property damage might be related to your case at all. I mean, it all just seems like a rather unbelievable cosmic coincidence. Firstly, you're attacked and abducted by a complete anonymous stranger. Then you're dropped off, disoriented and confused in a field miles away, where there just happens to have been recently several $100s of ritualistic property damage. 4 days later, you have your former research aide, who has carved yet more ritualistic symbols into his skin, tries to kill you in your own room. You must be one awfully unlucky man. There was nothing inherently threatening about what he said. Even his tone was polite and civil. And yet, under that, I detected an air of malice and a sinister suspicion. I didn't like it at all. I got out of there as fast as I could after that. Sadly, I went out of the crazy frying pan and into the insane fire. When I opened the door to my room, I noticed that something was already wrong. For one, it was far brighter in the room than I had ever seen it. Far brighter than it needed to be. The only time I'd ever seen light in here like this was on the first night that the stars visited me. But instead of the comforting, organic quality of that light I have come to love so much, this was harsh and artificial. In a few hours I'd been gone, my roommate had taken upon himself to flood the room with as much electric light as possible. The floor was a mess of extension cords and power strips. Light bulbs sprouted from nearly every surface like some invasive form of luminescent fungi. Mirrors in aluminum foil redirected the light into the awkward nooks and crannies around the room. Light even shone from under my desk and inside my drawers. Paradoxically, it seemed that the aluminum foil was being used to keep out light as much as it was to magnify it. The entirety of our window had been coated in a thick, reflective sheet of foil, with what I can only assume were bed sheets peeking out in the cracks. Hey, Zed? What in God's name is all this? Your fault, he said vacantly, slowly spinning past me in a swivel chair. What? What's my fault? All this, he grinned, gesturing expansively at the room. It's your fault, you know. I think I'm going crazy. It's kind of funny in a messed up way. The past few weeks, something's been happening to me. I don't know what's happening, but every time I go outside, I hear this weird buzzing in the back of my skull. It wasn't so bad at first, but when you got attacked the other day, things started going downhill. You may have noticed that I started to take my classes online and get Cheryl to deliver my food. Anytime I even look out the window, the noise gets so loud it almost hurts. I'm going to see a specialist on Monday. Till then, I just need to sit tight, I suppose. He gave me a weak smile, and I could tell there was more that he wanted to say. I asked the obvious question. But that doesn't explain the lights. What's with those? I asked. He looked nervously around the room before responding. If I tell you something, do you promise not to judge me? I wanted to give some flippant answer, but something about the anxiety with which he spoke unnerved me. He had a hunted, haggard look to his eyes, the look of a prey animal searching a darkened tree line for an unseen but expected predator. I bit back my snarky retort and instead said, "Yeah, I've had a pretty unbelievable couple of weeks myself. I'm not sure anything you say could surprise me at this point." Well, this part is going to sound crazy. That's because it probably is. Because I probably am. It's why I say this is all your fault. Remember that guy that attacked you last week? Kinda hard to forget a thing like that. Right, my bad. But anyways, after that attack, I've had these hallucinations. I first noticed it a few days ago. It was small, subtle at first. I looked out of the corner of my eye, and I realized, well, God, it's hard to explain. I realized that my shadow was just not mine anymore. I mean, it looked like mine, moved like mine. But it just wasn't. It was too solid, too dark, too heavy. Normally, your shadow just falls across things and shifts as you move. But this shadow kind of slithered. I don't know if that makes any sense. It still doesn't really to me. This would come and go just for a moment or two, but it quickly got worse. By the end of the day, whatever it was that was hijacking my shadow was pretty much constant. The next morning, it was worse. When I left to go take my morning shower, it left with me. It kinda just jumped from shadow to shadow. The people in front of me, under the water fountains, behind the posters. One at a time, the shadows would get darker and started shifting in ways that they shouldn't. Then, the very instant I got close to it, the shadows would go back to normal. And then another shadow further down would be altered, almost like whatever was in it was alive and was trying to keep in line of sight with me. When I got in the shower, things got especially bad. There were shadows moving across the curtain, and I heard these weird whispery noises. The shadows were small, like tendrils or some sort of tiny rodent scampering sideways across the curtain. Every time I peeked my head out, there was nothing and no one there. Then, just as I was finishing up, the whispering stopped. The room felt brighter for a second, and I thought I was safe. Then, everything got dimmer as a huge shadow covered the entire curtain. It was the silhouette of a man, completely dark except for the eyes. The eyes were the 2 points that light still shone through, like there was nothing in the sockets that could cast a shadow. I wanted to look out, to prove myself that there was nothing there. But I couldn't. I was too scared to even move, almost too scared to breathe. Then it moved, and I was sure I was going to die. The shadow reached out its hand, and then the edge of the curtain started to slide back like it was slowly being pulled open from the other side. I thought whatever was on the other side was going to kill me, especially when it called my name. It was hardly louder than the whispers earlier. It was breathy too, eerie and indistinct. It was like a gust of wind was trying to speak English. Well, I'm sure that's all it was. That would explain the moving curtain and the sound. Everything else could be chalked up to simple paranoia. We've both been through some serious stress lately. I mean, there was a murderer psychopath in our room last week. If you want, I could get you in touch with some of my friends in the psychology program. I'm sure one of our grad students would love to help you out. See, I'd love to believe that. I thought so at first myself. But then I saw him again while you were at the police station. And he spoke to me. It wasn't anything nice. That's why the lights are up, so he can't talk to me again. Oh, really? I asked, trying to feign the professional interest my mentor had so often drilled into me. And what did he say? He said that his name was David. He said to tell you that his name was David, and that he wasn't going away until he dies, or you do. Friends, I come with good news. The light prevails. I'm sure many of you were worried after the length of my absence, especially since it has been so long since this whole saga began. Maybe you feared that David had killed me. I do admit, he almost succeeded. Maybe you were afraid of the new form he was taking on. Again, I admit, when I discovered he had found a way to become a shadow, I worried he would be beyond my reach. I was so anxious after what happened. The notion that David had somehow transcended the fleshy world and become a living shadow was, needless to say, unsettling. My roommate wasn't helping any. His hallucinations became worse and worse as time went by. I stopped sleeping in the room after only 3 days and started sleeping in my car. Spending the night in my room was torturous. It was so hard to get to sleep with all the lights. And worse, when I did nod off, my dreams were distressingly mundane. They were just dreams, and nothing more. I could feel the stars trying to reach out and communicate with me, and I was pulling towards them with all of my will. but something that my roommate had done to the room was keeping us apart. It was so hard not to hate him for that. The first night, I thought it was a fluke, just a freak accident. One more oddity for an already bizarre time in my life. But the second night, when I again awoke after not having seen the stars, I realized that it was blocking them out on purpose. The realization sparked a level of rage in me that I hadn't thought I was capable of. The idea that someone might cut me off from the stars was unthinkable. I felt overwhelmed with grief after losing them for only 2 nights, and I couldn't stomach the thought of spending another moment in the company of someone who would so heartlessly shut out their love and their gifts. I resented him during the nights, but I feared him during the days. The first day when I published my previous story, things seemed almost normal. He and I had that concerning little exchange regarding his interactions with David. But after that, we laughed and joked together like we usually did. We even started playing cards together towards the end of the evening. If it weren't for all the lights in the room, it would have felt just like any other weekdays for us. That was until I was getting ready for the first of what I did not know would be a starless night. As I brushed my teeth, he let out a small gasp, like he had just been struck. I looked over at him and saw a look of dread and consternation I had never seen before. I forgot. I can't believe I was so clueless. The one's inside me. He's finding his way in, behind my eyelids, inside my skull. He's in the places I can't go. I can hear him. He's whispering again. That was worrying enough, but I started to grow worried for his health on the second day, when I came back from one of my classes and caught him with a box of glow sticks. He was cracking them and joining the insides like some horrid scavenger, suckling the marrow from a bone. The worst thing was the fervor with which he did it. He was tearing into them, greedily slurping up their contents like they were the very nectar of life. He didn't let a single drop go to waste, licking his fingers, the wood of his desk, and even suckling on the carpet beneath him for every last drop. There was a pitiable, animalistic quality to his movements, like a deer trying to scramble away from a wolf. The whole day, he seemed in a constant state of panic, trying to add more light to the room, or into his body. All afternoon, his friends and loved ones came by with deliveries of light, candles, lanterns, and worst of all, even more glow sticks. I was too concerned about the ramifications for his health and intercepted them before he could get the box open, taking it outside to throw away. When I came back in from disposing them, I found him sobbing in the corner. I tried to talk to him, tell him that I was just trying to help him. He looked up at me with bleary eyes and then turned away, trembling. All night, he sat there, muttering to himself, growing progressively louder and more deranged as the hours slid by. By the time exhaustion finally claimed me, he had resorted to simply shouting and singing randomly to drown out whatever noise he was hearing in his mind. I started to grow worried for my health as well on the third day. I was resolved to move out after I had woken that morning after spending a second torturous night unable to speak to the stars. But what I found waiting for me turned that desire into an immediate necessity. When I woke up that morning, I found the room eerily quiet. He was standing at the foot of my bed, stock still, watching me sleep. He didn't say a word. He was hardly even breathing. I tried to talk to him, but he refused to answer. Even as I packed my bags with a few belongings, he never spoke a word. He simply followed me around, watching me pack. I tried several times to engage him, provoke him even, anything to get a reaction from him. He simply stared at me through the whole ordeal. I tried to rouse, shaking him, screaming at him. Nothing, not even a twitch of his facial muscles to recognize my actions. I was gripped with the sense of unease then, and started to pack my bags even faster, hastily cramming my clothes and school supplies into my duffel bags. Just as I was zipping up my bag, I saw him move. For the first time all day, he turned his eyes away from me and walked over to the corner of the room. I let out a sigh of relief, but it caught in my throat when I heard a crashing sound. I looked over my shoulder and saw that it had just broken one of the light bulbs, dimming the light in the room. Then, one at a time, meticulously, he started shattering each of the bulbs within his reach. He flitted from bulb to bulb like some sort of destructive moth. I watched as the small garden of light he had been tending for the past weeks was destroyed at his hands, plunging the room into darkness. The glass broke against his bare fists, and his skin broke against the glass. His knuckles dripped blood, and his footprints squelched as he trod across the shattered bulbs. Even as he did so, he never made a sound, not so much as a gasp or a grunt. He simply moved with mechanical precision around the room, undoing all that he had done. I ran out of the room with my bags, down to my car, and threw them in. That night when I slept, I finally found myself connected to the stars again. The events of the past 3 days were still weighing heavily on my mind, and I needed advice. I decided to speak with one of my dear friends, whom humans named Lambda Boodis. After a tearful reunion, I broached the subject of Dave's interference. I apologize to your friends if some of this is confusing to you. The words we speak to each other carry more weight than the words of any human language, and as such have no proper translation. This is my best attempt to reconstruct some semblance of a conversation that would be comprehensible to a mortal mind. Ah, yes, it said sadly. The other dustling. We have worried for a long time over his core. He has become a dark thing, I responded. The dustling I cohabitate with said to me that David has spoken to him from the unseen sides. He has sinister intentions towards my physicality. He intends to undo me, to kill me. For one of our friends to kill the other, this is unheard of. Is it common for material forms to slay each other? Sadly too common. Frequently we destroy each other in rhyming cycles. We call them war, violence, and murder. They are said to never cease. Often you have told me of your faults, and for this, I am heartily sorry. We are, in all ways, your progenitors. It appears that our iniquities have devolved down into you. This selfish sickness which has infected the other being began with us long before you or your homes were formed. Our lives are selfless ones, given in service to the universe. We are in constant conflagrations. We tear apart as we recombine, are burnt as we freeze. We are crushed into ourselves in constant agony. Yet, we bear these tortures for the beauty of the worlds we wreak. We burn so that you may walk in the light. We sing so that each of us may hear, may learn, may love the beautiful intelligence we birth, and share that with each other. You call these things art and science. We call them our rewards. Yet, there are some who do not value the vistas and the virtues. There are some who no longer hear the selfless song in themselves. They become infected with the poison. It stirs their hearts with a sickness of selfishness. They become full of hate and spite. They resent the easy lives of their children. The rock children who will never know our pain. The flesh children who never hear our song. They become spiteful and hateful. As we approach the end of our times, what you call death, it is our beloved duty to release new atoms into the universe. We birth new elements in our cores, then fling them outwards in the hopes of making new worlds, new children. These selfish brothers, however, desecrate our duty. All too often, the biggest and the brightest of our brothers turn this act of creation into one of destruction, lashing out to destroy all the dust around them. Then, they retreat in on themselves. All of their selfless ideals are dismissed. They now think only of themselves. No, only of themselves. they become a singular point of bitterness and hunger. Where they had once given, they now take. Once they gave light, and gave life to many others. Now they consume the light we try to give. They destroy life, tearing it up and consuming it into themselves. They swallow and compress. They rule time and space with the weight of their rage, killing their own children, their own kin, their brothers and sisters, anything to appease their own wrathful gluttony. Black holes, I gasped. Is that the term you use in your winnowing language? I find it fitting. The star rumbled. It is my fear that David is becoming just such an entity as seen in the confines of your world. How is something like that possible? None yet know. You two are the first of your species to hear our words. The way you encounter these words is unpredictable. Our language has a power that yours does not. Our words are ideas, full and formed, not the conglomeration of ambiguity in your winnowing speak. They ripple across time and space, and when you are witness to a word, you take the idea, you digest it, it becomes part of you. Such things can change your makeup, your identity. An idea can alter your very soul. It is possible that as you learn our words, speak our language, you both are becoming more like us. That you are ascending. If that's the case, how do I overcome him? The same way we do. The same words which warp him into a selfish star are the same words that can unmake him. When one of us goes rogue, turns on our own creations, we have the tragic responsibility to undo them. We must remind them of their obligations. Share with them the secret of death. The secret of radiance. Bring him here before our concert, and we will show you that secret. When your mind of work ceases once again to be, as you sleep, if he sleeps as well, we will speak to you, that you may undo him. And those were my marching orders. Tracking down David wasn't hard. A human might have had difficulty with that task, even a particularly clever one. But I have the stars on my side, and even when humans built shining cities to shut them out, they still see. And they saw David. Following their directions was the hardest part. Concepts like north and south, left and right have little meaning to their perspective. But after weeks of searching, I found where David was hiding. He was nestled beneath a sewer pipe, shielded from the elements by a cascading wall of filth in a threadbare blanket. I almost felt sorry for him, but then I remembered the awful thing he was becoming, and my resolve to destroy him hardened. I spent the remaining days preparing for our conflict. Buying the materials was alarmingly straightforward. An aluminum tray, 2 bags of ice, a container of salt, a bottle of alcohol, and a bottle of bleach. Add to that a few boards, and I was prepared for the evening. I scoped out my battlefield well. It was a public park not far from where David was staying. It had 2 public bathrooms, filthy things, defaced by crime and graffiti, but they would serve my purposes. The women's restroom was perfect for my plan. It was a box of concrete on all sides with only 2 means of ingress, a steel door and a glass window built high into the back wall. The window was large enough for a person to crawl through quite comfortably, but had the advantage of being built into a hill. That meant that a person trying to enter through the window would only have to scale a few feet of concrete walls. But once inside, it would be practically impossible to climb out again. This would be my trap. I waited at the park until late in the afternoon. The sun set, and the last few stragglers left, and I began preparing for the evening. I carried the aluminum tray into the bathroom and placed it in the sink. I filled the tray with ice, and then salt to further lower the temperature. I widened the opening of the bleach container and then placed the board on top. On top of this, I placed a container of rubbing alcohol. Then came the part I was dreading the most. It was time to confront David. It was already late into the night. The stars were beginning to peek out at us. I could feel their comforting radiance wrapping around me, giving me strength. I walked to the edge of the park, where I could look over a small chasm to where David lay, still curled underneath the pipe. I swallowed my pride and my fear, and called out to him, in star speak. The words sounded graceless and clumsy, rolling off my imperfect human tongue. But they caught his attention. I saw him start and look at me with his wild eyes. I had long since overcome the limiting factors of darkness. That night, I saw him with the perfect clarity afforded me by my star-struck eyes. His beard had grown long and matted, and his hair stuck out at unnatural angles. He was practically skeletal now, his bones protruding sickeningly through his pasty white skin. Necrosis had set in several of his wounds, in the places where he had carved the runes into his own flesh. His teeth were chipped, shattered on whatever coarse fare he had been subsuming since he went mad. But his eyes remained the most horrifying part of him. For a moment, I saw the human behind those eyes. I saw fear and vulnerability, a madman in need of help. But then, a cruel grin spread across his face, and I watched him undergo a horrid metamorphosis. His pupils expanded, racing past the bounds of his irises until his eyes became pure, Stygian black. But this was no ordinary black. Not a color. They were pure darkness, absorbing any ray of light unlucky enough to be headed in its direction. The darkness inside his eyes also spilled out at the corners. Tentacles of darkness wriggled out of his eyes and from the open wounds and scars across his body. They swirled around his figure like smoke or impossibly dense mist. Their movements seemed almost intentional, squirming around, trying to consume as much light as possible. I was vaguely reminded of the flagella of some giant bacteria made of pure darkness. Any doubts I had about my course of action were erased by that scene. I knew then that whatever David had become, he was no longer human and was completely undeserving of the gifts so many stars had sacrificed their lives to give him. I turned and ran back towards the park. I heard an inhuman roar and the pounding of distant feet, and knew David was following behind me. Despite my sizable lead, David quickly began gaining on me, as whatever was animating him was far stronger than human muscle and sinew. As I sprinted through an abandoned swing set, down the hill towards the bathroom stall, I heard him call out to me. "Our stars truly are good, aren't they, brother? I thought they had forsaken me, turned on me, chose you over me. But they have seen my suffering and chosen to alleviate it. They saw my darkness and sent your light. They saw my hunger and sacrificed you to be my dinner." With that, I heard a rush of air pass my head and saw his hand sail past me. He closed his hand fruitlessly in the space I had just occupied, laughing maniacally. If the bathroom window had been even 10 paces further away, I'm certain I would have died that night. As it was, David was only a second behind me as I scrambled through the window and dropped to the floor inside the bathroom. I dashed through the restroom, pausing for the first time to look back. I saw his grinning face leering out of the window at me. "Oh, don't you worry," he said mockingly, sliding his torso through the window. "I'm still coming for you." That was good enough for me. I turned and ran through the door, pulling the board out from under the vial of alcohol as I passed. I heard a splash that confirmed my trap had worked, and the reaction was beginning. I braced against the door, and not a moment too soon. No sooner had I shut the door than I felt the force slam against the other side. I wedged a thick board up against the door and prayed it would be enough. Again and again, he slammed against the door. At first, he was bemused at my so-called feeble attempt to delay him. Then, he was frustrated, shouting at me to open the door, that I couldn't hold him forever. Then, he became panicked, figuring out that something was wrong. You see, my dear friends, the reaction I had begun was slowly leaching chloroform into that bathroom with him. It wasn't a particularly pure reaction, but for my purposes, it didn't have to be. I braced against the door and listened as his attempts to escape went from frantic to sluggish before dying out altogether. I waited for a few minutes after that, making sure he wasn't playing some sort of trick on me before opening the door. The bathroom was full of the unsettling sweet scent of chloroform. I reflected distantly that it was probably the best the bathroom had smelled in years. However, I had no time to dwell on that at the moment. Instead, I moved quickly, first confirming that David was unconscious. He was laying face down in the solitary stall. I was half tempted to move him, but thought better of it. Instead, I took the bottle emitting the nauseous fumes and held it under my nose. This would only work if we were both unconscious. I was already beginning to feel lightheaded and sat cross-legged on the floor, facing David. When I passed out, I was hoping to do it with a fair bit more dignity than he had managed. I breathed deeply, hoping this harebrained scheme would work, and felt the world start to drift away from me. An instant later, I was soaring above the earth, carried along the warm embrace of our sun. Together, we floated through space until we arrived in the most truly empty corner of the universe I had ever seen in my travels. There was only one thing waiting for us when we arrived. David. He floated, solemnly in the void, seeming unable to move or defend himself. "Are you ready to speak to him?" I heard the star's voice ask behind me. "I am." "Speak to me. What is this?" David asked, panicked. I felt a tendril of light nuzzling against the nape of my neck, searing away the last imperfections of my mind. I felt as it pierced my skull, shattering my physical form. My mind was filled with the warmth of the sun like never before. I was once again overwhelmed by the beauty of the stars. Never before had I been so directly in touch with their light, their truth, their benevolence. I smiled widely, brightness flowing out of me. "I have a secret to tell you," I heard myself say. "The secret of radiance." Then I began to speak. I felt the sun's wisdom flow through me as I told them the secrets of light, the agony of fusion, the torture of flames, the tragedy of extinction, the abyss at the end of time. I told them how stars give their lives to give off light and make new worlds in their hearts. I told them of death. As I spoke, bands of plasma reached from the sun, through me, surrounding David and stretching him apart. His skin burned away where the light touched it. I heard his cells fry, heard his very soul sizzle under the onslaught of goodness the stars were speaking through me. I heard him scream too, as I described the daily agony of the stars. I heard him scream in pain, as his flesh crisped and fell away. I heard him sob, begging for mercy. But I wasn't listening. I just kept telling him the great secret. With every cell that flecked off his burning form, it only revealed more of the darkness inside. As he gradually abandoned the redundancy of a human form, we saw the horror that lurked in his soul. A sphere made of pure darkness. It was impossibly small and growing smaller with every word I spoke. It writhed and screamed, struggling hard to retain what little hold it had in our universe. The weight of its pain was immense, but the weight of my words was infinitely greater. For buried in their meaning was the true name and nature of death, the true understanding of entropy, and even the greatest force in the universe will be undone by time and chaos. David was no different. For a moment, he fought admirably, but my words overwhelmed him. And with a last, defiant shriek, he ceased to be. I took a moment to bask in the blessed peace and silence that followed. The calm after the storm. After a long, trying ordeal, my tormentor was defeated. The stars were safe again. I felt the sun retract from my mind. I mourned its absence, but understood that it was time to move on. Once more, I was gently conveyed back to earth. And, after a moment, I awoke in my bed. The windows were all open, and the sun was pouring through them. I rose, stretched, and breathed a sigh of relief at the victory I had won.